Happy Leap Day, everybody. We are heading into an interesting week. My wife is going to be heading out to Hawaii for kind of a business type thing. So she's going to be gone all week. Might be able to do one of these a night then. Probably do them in the evening. Might be able to do them in the afternoon. We'll see. I think most of you who are tuning in the evenings anyway. Got worship tomorrow, but the wife is still packing. Got to be up at 4 to get her to the airport. So anyway, tonight we're going to be doing Genesis chapter 5. Hey Mandy, how are you? Long time no see. Last time we were on here, Genesis 4, we looked at the lineage of Cain and his murder of Abel, and then the arrival of Seth at the end of that chapter. In chapter 5 is the lineage of Seth. So, starting in verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam, and the day that God created man, and the likeness of God made he him. And as we saw in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, that likeness is that we are a spiritual being. We are the only creation that God made that has a soul, that has a spirit that is like God. John 4:24 says that God is a spirit, and so we're like him, unlike any of the other living things. Hey Joe, we're studying Genesis 5 tonight, so male and female created he them. There's a lot of people confused about that these days, but God made us male and female. There's only two genders, and everybody else is just confused, and I have no qualms at all about saying that, because that's the truth. They want to come on. Oh, thanks Mandy, I appreciate that. A lot of people want to come on and say there's all of these different things, and really all they're doing is they're just messing up their bodies. So they're introducing chemicals, or they're chopping parts off, or they're just really tearing up themselves, trying to pretend to be something that they're not. But God made male and female. That's all there is. You can't get past the genetics. So that's pretty much where we're at on that. But this is the second time that he said that. We see Matthew 19:4. Jesus harkens back to the beginning. So here we are still at the beginning, talking about male and female. Still verse 2, and blessed them and called their name Adam. Now that's interesting. He called their name. So what did God call them? He called their name Adam. This idea of being man. This is the name that he gave to us, kind of as a species. He was the first man. Tolkien does this. He he names men as a race, like an elf or a dwarf or a hobbit. He calls them men, not as in males, but as in the kind of creature that they are. So calling us Adam is to call us what kind we are. God named us in the way that Adam went on to name the animals. Now, Adam was also his personal name, and Eve was called Eve because she was the mother of all living. So their names had meaning, and we see this throughout the Bible, that all of these people, hey Stephen, all of these people that we read about, their names have a meaning. Gabriel, God is my might. My littlest one, her middle name is Brielle, which is short for Gabrielle, which is the female form of Gabriel. God is my might. Michael, that's your first name, but Brielle is your second name, is your middle name. She's over here playing Minecraft. Bit of a night owl like me. Michael means one who is like God. So these names have meaning. And Adam lived, verse 3, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness and after his image, and called his name Seth. So here we are 130 years later. This is the first kind of chronology that we have in the scriptures about how long or how much time has passed. So somewhere between Adam's creation and 130 years, he had Cain, he had Abel. Cain murdered Abel. Cain ran off with a wife, which was his sister, and then he ended up Adam at 130 years, which is a little over 10% of his life. He has Seth. Seth is by no means his third child, but it is like a lot of times we read about in the Bible. This is the child that is named or is identified by the writer, in this case Moses, because he's the one that is the focus of the history. We see this with Abraham. Abraham had Ishmael, he had Isaac, but a lot of people don't know he goes on to have 5 more children. He has another wife after Sarah dies and lives to be 170 years old. Most people don't realize that. So anyway, so in verse 4, oh my goodness, it's dry up here.
Yeah, you my dad.
I might send you to get some water if you don't mind a little bit. It says, in the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. So that doesn't mean he had them before Seth or after Seth, just that he had them. He lived to be 930 years old, and all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enoch. Now, again, that doesn't mean that Seth didn't have other kids. It doesn't mean that he didn't have any before Enoch or after. It's just that Enoch is the one that carries on the historical line that we're following here in the Bible. So he has Enoch, and Seth lived after he begat Enoch 807 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. So we're seeing here a chronology. From creation to Seth is 130 years, and then from Seth to Enoch is 105 years. So we're 235 years after creation here for Enoch. And then Enoch lived 90 years and begat Canaan. So if you're keeping a running tally, this is 325 years. And Enoch lived after he begat Canaan 815 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalaleel. So we're at 325, and then 70, so 395. Canaan lived after he begat Mahalaleel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalaleel lived 65 years, so 395, 460. And begat Jared, so 460 at Jared. Mahalaleel lived after he begat Jared 830 years, begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Mahalaleel were 895 years, and he died. Jared lived 162 years and begat Enoch. So 460, 560, 622 years after creation. Enoch comes onto the scene, and Jared begat sons and daughters. And Jared lived 800 years. I'm sorry, Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years. Where am I at? 562, I think. 562, so no, that's not right. Well, now I've lost count. I'm trying to keep this in my head, and I just can't do it. Anyway, so you can see, we follow the numbers through, and we find out that the flood comes about 1,500 years after creation. So 1,400, 1,500, something like that. If I was less tired and had a piece of paper in front of me, I'd probably keep up with it better. But Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. and Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. Now here's interesting. Methuselah is the longest recorded living human being, and his dad is Enoch, who walked with God. Do you think that Methuselah was a faithful person? That he was a person that followed in his father's footsteps to be granted such a long life? His name is known everywhere because of his long lifespan. But Enoch is the one that walked with God. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, there's a lot of people out there that say that the only person who ever came to this earth... Yep. The only person who ever came to this earth and lived without sin is Jesus. But I think there's a pretty good case that could be made that Enoch was a person who walked with God in such a way that he did not sin, and God did not allow him to see death because of that. That amidst all of the descendants of Cain that are off in the land of Nod, all of these people that had come after Adam, you have this man who is so faithful, so righteous, that he was said to have walked with God, and that God did not allow him to see death. God just took him from the earth. See here, Stephen, you have heard the skeptics claim how we cannot trace the timeline because we don't know the begotten, our first generation, or grandchildren, etc. Isn't it fair to say that such does not matter, since we are told how old each was when the next was begotten? Right, it's completely irrelevant. I mean, even if we're talking a generation skipped, which there's no indication of that not in this particular lineage, it doesn't matter, because we know that Adam was so old when Seth was born. Seth was so old when his son was born, all the way down. That's exactly a good point. So it does not matter if generations were skipped. We still have a continuous line of chronology here. So anyway, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And I can't say 100%, but I believe there is a lot of evidence here that points to the idea that Enoch was sinless, showing us that it could be done by men who were not Jesus, men who were not God in the flesh. So Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. Now there's an interesting name, because if you remember, what was the name of the son of Cain, or the descendant of Cain in Genesis 4, that kind of got a little snooty? First of all, you have an Enoch, and then you have Lamech in verse, let's see here, verse 18 is when we start talking about him. Lamech is the kind of the last descendant of Cain that we're told about, and we don't really know how long they lived, or what became of Cain's line by the time we're down here to Methuselah. So Methuselah is the son of Enoch, has the same name as the son of Cain. Interesting. And then he names his son Lamech, which is the same name as this other guy over in Nod. Is there a connection between them? I'm going to say no. What I believe here is that we're looking at names that have meanings, and you're going to look at names that are kind of like John or Robert, or some of those that are common names because of what they mean. Now, I haven't done the research here tonight. I certainly don't have it memorized, but the meanings of these names is something that you should look up, and I bet you're going to find that Lamech is something that is fairly common. I might even comment on it tomorrow, now that I think about it, and we'll see what the word Lamech means and see if it's just a common word. But it's interesting that he's named after this person who was considered part of this wicked line of Cain in Genesis 4. Also, we know that Methuselah died the year of the flood, and we also know that Lamech and everybody after him, other than Noah, also died the year of the flood. Does that mean that Methuselah died the year of the flood, but before the flood? We don't know. We're not told. Lamech was not considered faithful, so he was not allowed on the ark, was not called to be on the ark. Was that because he was just too old, or did he die beforehand? Again, the Bible doesn't say, we can't draw any conclusions, but we know that Lamech was not on the ark. It says, and Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son, and called his name Noah, saying, the same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which Jehovah has cursed. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Now, we don't know why he died. We don't know how he died. Did he die in the flood? Bible doesn't say. But what we do know about Lamech, he is the father of Noah. And what we know about Noah is that Noah is faithful enough that he and his family are taken onto the ark. So we're talking about the great grandson of Enoch.
Dad, do you know how to spell dog?
I do, but I'm doing this right now, okay? So you're just going to have to do something else until I'm done, okay?
It starts with
Dog starts with a D.
D. Oh.
Yep.
Where's the D?
Okay. So just to rehash here, Enoch walked with God, was taken from the earth without dying. Methuselah was the longest living man, named his son the same thing as someone who was considered wicked, the last of Cain's line that's mentioned in the Bible, in any kind of significance. Although Lamech did have some sons, Jubal, Jabal, and Tubal Cain. But you have Lamech has this faithful son who is so faithful to God, not necessarily flawless, not necessarily without sin, but you have this son that is considered faithful enough by God to preserve him and his family and all of the kinds that walked upon the earth. So we can know a little bit, or we can infer a little bit about these men, but the Bible just doesn't come out and say anything. What I will say, and I'm thinking probably I might continue on to Genesis 6 tonight. But what I do know is that there are people in Genesis 5 that are faithful one after another in what we see. We see Seth, we see Enoch, we see Noah, and this idea of faithful men largely has to do, I think, with their fathers and with the family that they surround themselves with. Remember, these people are separated now from the line of Cain to an extent. Cain has taken his family. He's over in the land of Nod. Who knows how many people end up going over that way. But they are not near where Adam and Eve are, perhaps fairly close to where the Garden of Eden is, just not able to go into it. But we know that Cain went away. He left that area. The land, the earth is what he was cursed from, not leaving the planet, but this area. And so that physical separation, there's so many implications that are going on right here. Think about Moses and the Israelites right now. They're wandering in the wilderness, and where are they headed? They're headed to the promised land, a land that they're told is flowing with milk and honey. They're heading to a special place, and here they're reading about these people who live in this special place from before the flood, and how they were righteous and how they were faithful, how they walked with God. You can kind of see how Moses is folding this into preparing them for being the nation that they have just become. They go down into the Red Sea. It's a kind of, or a type of water immersion. We see the water on both sides and the cloud above, so there's a type there pointing to New Testament immersion. They go into the water as slaves, they come out as free. And now they're a nation. And as this nation, they are receiving their law. They're receiving their constitution for 40 years, wandering around. Moses is writing this stuff down, and he is preparing them by telling them lessons. And one of the lessons here is that, hey, the faithful got to stay in this area, this land, this earth, the way that the text reads, this land, whereas the wicked were not. The wicked were kicked out. The wicked were cursed and forced to leave. So a lot of parallels going on here. So and all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now that doesn't mean he was 500 years old and had triplets. He was 500 years old when we're going to turn the context here. And during that span of 500 years, he had 3 sons. That's all this is saying. So he didn't have triplets or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to chapter 6 here, just because I'm itching to get there anyway. Chapter 6, verse 1, it says, And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Now here's where I begin to talk about that crossover, because men are multiplying, they're told, so they're multiplying on the face of the earth, and daughters are born to them, and the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? In every place in Scripture, every single one, and I've researched this for years, every single time you read about the sons of God, these are faithful men. They're not angels. There's nowhere in Scripture, anywhere, that you can come up. It's not in Job 1 and 2. It's not in Job, I believe it's 35. You read in John 1:12 that those who believe are given the authority to become the sons of God. But everywhere you read of this idea of the sons of God, it is always faithful men. So what you're looking at here in verse 2 is these 2 lines, the Genesis 5 line of Seth, the sons of God, and the daughters of men, Genesis 4, Cain's line. So they're spreading out. These populations are growing, and in the latter generations, like when Lamech comes around, like when Methuselah comes around, when you start seeing these later generations, all of these sons and daughters that they're having, they're mixing, they're crossing over, they're good-looking people. Everybody is good-looking at this time because there's no genetic degradation. The environment is such that we were the epitome of human existence. We were taller, stronger, faster, smarter, beautiful people. And so they're crossing. The wicked and the righteous are crossing because of those physical desires. And so the men of God, the sons of God, are taking wives of whoever they chose, and they corrupted them. And Jehovah said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, what does this mean? This is not God saying, okay, I'm tired of them living 1,000 years. I only want them to live to be 120 years old. That's not what he's saying here. My spirit shall not always strive with man. Enoch walked with God. I think that's a literal statement. I think at this time, God, in the form of God the Son, is still walking among those who lived around the place where Adam lived. That he was still walking and talking with them. He was obviously talking directly to Cain and Abel. He was obviously talking with Enoch, and took him from the earth, didn't allow him to see physical death. So I think you still have this idea of God the Son still, yeah, a very pretty bird. Um, and so God is saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm here, I'm walking and talking amongst them, and they're still growing more and more wicked by the day. I've been trying. He's striving with them. He's there talking to them, trying to get them to come back to him, to be faithful, the sons of God again. And they're not listening. There's a whole bunch of people today. Well, if God would just come down and do this thing, if God were here, if God would just raise my dead father from the grave, or all of these challenges that they offer God, I would just believe, and I would turn and I would serve him. They had God walking with them for 1,500 years, and they still turned away from him. They were still wicked people, to the point where God has said, I've had enough. I'm not going to strive with them anymore. I'm not going to try to work and get them to be faithful people anymore. They've got 120 years left. That's all I'm going to give them. And then in verse 4 it says, there were giants in those days. Now, the word there, giants, is Nephilim. Now, there is a lot to be said, and I might have to stop here. But there's a lot to be said about what Nephilim are and aren't. Nephilim are not half angels. The word is just giants, because everybody was a giant. Everybody we would consider a giant, not in the sense of like in the fantasy movies or some of the sci-fi fantasy stuff that you see on TV, but like Goliath, like Shaquille O'Neal, like what's the guy that holds the record? Wadlow. There's these people that are incredibly tall, most of them playing in the NBA. We would consider those people giants, especially considering who is Moses writing to. The Israelite people, the Hebrew people, are not a tall people. When we get to Saul, Saul is head and shoulders above everybody else. He's practically a giant himself, because the Hebrew people are not a very tall people. And so what Moses is saying is everybody back then, they were all giants. This does not say anything about half angels, celestial angels coming down and interbreeding with humans. That isn't even biologically, that it's nonsense. But what they had was superior physical specimens during that time. Now here's where it gets crazy. Number one, we know that only Noah and his family survived on the ark. If only Noah and his family survived on the ark, how did the Anakim and Goliath and his brothers, he had 4 brothers, how did these giants survive the flood? Because if you weren't on the ark and you were on the earth, you died in the flood. For people to say, well, the angels came down and they created these half humans, and they were giants, they were special human beings, they were half humans, and they were these awesome, powerful creatures. Well, they died in the flood, whatever they were. How do we still have giants afterwards? How did the Anakim come about? How did the Goliath and his brothers come about if everything was killed in the flood? And the answer is that the giants survived on the ark because Noah and his not right now, I'm still doing this, they survived on the ark because Noah and his family were part of those giants. They were part of those superior physical specimens. And so when Noah and his family get off the ark, some of that might and that power survived, even though the genetic code began to degrade once the canopy was gone, once the protection was gone. Every now and then you're going to have somebody that is exceptionally tall and exceptionally powerful. Again, I'm gonna look at Shaquille O'Neal. The dude is a giant. He is massive and powerful, and I can imagine Goliath being just a little bit bigger than him. and just crazy powerful. So there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, not mighty half men, not mighty half angels. They were mighty men, which are of old, men of renown. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. I think my wife is done with her packing. She's sending me messages here. So we'll pick up in Genesis 6. I might do a rehash of the first 4 verses and get a running start tomorrow when I do the rest of the chapter. So thank you all for tuning in. Hope you all found it interesting and edifying, and we will talk to you all later.